Hello, everyone, and welcome to the SD-WAN State of the Industry Insights webinar. We're glad to have you with us today. Today, I'm joined by Steve Thomas, who is with Frost & Sullivan, and Stephen Horgan, who is our Sangoma product director for our SD-WAN product. Just some housekeeping details. If you have questions during this webinar, feel free to drop them in the chat, and we will answer some of them live, and some of them we may answer during the presentation. And following this presentation, we will be sending out an email along with the recorded sessions so that you have it for your records. So without further ado, let's get started, and we'll bring in Steve Thomas. Hey, Steve.
Hey, Julie. Thanks for inviting me here today. I'm happy to be on the call. And yeah, so Steve Thomas with Frost, and I wanted to highlight that I'm in the network services practice within the overall information and communication technology practice within Frost & Sullivan. And definitely going to talk to you about SD-WAN. Next slide, go ahead, Julie. It's got the agenda. It's got, we're going to go in 4 key areas. Not only going to speak to SD-WAN, but I think there's enough ecosystem there to talk about a couple of different areas like SASE and hybrid cloud and UCaaS, and then give some updates to some of the end user survey information that we have from being a market research firm. And then we'll wrap up with the customer portals, which is what I think is the kind of key benefit here for service providers to really tout their integration capabilities and provide that portal, that window to their services to the clients. Next slide, please. So one thing that's been really good about software-defined wide area network is the goal here of initially being just a low-cost option, over the traditional MPLS networks is still there, but it's been around for about 8 or 9 years, and it's still pretty much growing. And what's interesting about that is being the overlay to the underlay technologies. We've kind of replaced it with like a single MPLS network in the branch network to being more, they're replacing it with like a direct internet access or a broadband or 2 DIAs, because it is lower cost. So what's really good in the promise of SD-WAN has always been just you end up with a higher availability because you can use these multiple technologies and multiple paths to the various network locations you're trying to go. So that's really what we see or have seen as the promise of SD-WAN. But it's also, I wanted to highlight, it's not completely killing MPLS, because most providers are still utilizing MPLS. It's still part of the underlay and people are really still using it in 1 gig or higher speeds. Definitely some data center to data center connectivities or in trading platforms. They're referring to financial services, where milliseconds really matter. Or in the international networking space, where having a little bit of tighter jitter tolerances is needed to make sure you have good, reliable connectivity over long distances. And as mentioned, the SD-WAN is an area, vendor is another area where Frost & Sullivan definitely has some expertise and some reports. And what we gathered from our 2022 study was that industry itself was growing about 25–26% still, which is still quite good for vendors that were for a technology that's been out maybe 8–9 years already. And that's when I say SD-WAN vendors, I wanted to highlight that it's it's the Ciscos of the world, the VMwares, Versas, and those type of companies. That's what I refer to as the vendors. And then specifically, I did a managed SD-WAN study last year with Frost, and we covered covered, about 12 vendors and partners, and they were still seeing about a 22 to 23% growth period. So just highlights that we're still growing in this area. If you think you've missed the boat on your SD-WAN opportunity, you haven't. And then highlight where the higher speeds are coming in more is still like in the industry itself. The 100 gig pipes are coming in at the data center to data center connectivity, mostly driven by the hyperscalers, and they're even asking for 400 gigs, and most of the service providers are also preparing for 400 gig futures. And then they, because of the hyperscalers and connectivity and cloud being so important, which obviously generates the backbone providers to then upgrade to 800 gigs or much higher. And so traffic is definitely still driving larger and larger backbone connectivity between the providers themselves. Next slide. And wanted to highlight, to give you a little bit, this is not necessarily an architectural diagram, but it's more of how network and security is just simply merging together. The SA and SE in that, is the secure access, secure edge, and SD-WAN is very much part of the SA part, where SE is very much part of the security. And so what we see there is the vendors themselves, in terms of not only the service providers, but the vendors themselves are, wanting to take everything from the LAN to security and bundle it in one package. And so a lot of the vendors are moving to a single software set of code or single platform to do that. What's good about working with service providers is they've already taken that and integrated it into ordering processes, monitoring processes, and things of that nature. And so I wanted to highlight the importance of the POP or the service POP. And some of the vendors providers will call themselves super POPs, because this is where they have the controllers of the SD-WAN service, but also the secure edge and the connectivity to on-ramp to various public cloud or SASE offerings. And there's a lot of interconnectivity there. And so they're integrating all of this and also providing UCaaS services, which we'll talk later on. But what's really interesting about SD-WAN as a whole is it's taking all of this into consideration, because there's just so much activity with multi-cloud, IoT, the remote users, and then the data centers and branches don't go away either. So it's cumulative. It's always not. It's not an or. It's an and in the environment. And I just wanted to highlight that it's hard to, you don't want to consider SD-WAN without also reviewing the SASE offering, as well as the pre-integrated offerings the service provider would have. So next slide, Julie. Yeah, so this slide is to highlight a little bit about how the multi-cloud and hybrid clouds are really kind of a driver for doing more with SD-WAN. There's just a tremendous amount of things being added onto the networks, and the more things you have, the more items you have to manage. There's more things to break, more things to fix, more things to apply policy on, more things to secure. And so one of the things I wanted to bring to attention is, back in 2020, we had 26 billion IoT devices. By 26, we're looking at 65 billion. So that's driving a lot of activity in the space as well. And I brought the kind of smart accessories, smart embeds, and smart outfits just to show some of the use cases. We have an IoT practice here at Frost, and they work heavily in this. But my background, I had a little bit of, I was in manufacturing, worked for a manufacturing company in their global telecom group, and we occasionally went out to plants. And so some of these like exosuits and smart glasses and smart boots, I didn't say I saw every one of those, but I could see how, these type of things would clearly benefit people who wore them, because it is a dangerous place. I mean, there's physically in a lot of manufacturing plants, not just automobiles, but other manufacturing plants, there's a lot of moving parts, heavy moving parts. And so being able to keep your employees safe and secure is also very critical. So wanted to highlight that they may seem big brother-ish, but at the end of the day, it's also a matter of improving safety. And, that's always a good thing for technology. Jumping over to the cloud and a couple of bullet points over here is because it's cloud driven and the edge is becoming more important with the applications being there. It does create an environment for the service provider to make use of that super pop and that pre-integrated things and filter the cloud activity or multi-cloud and the applications, because now you have to also secure your cloud offering. And so it's not, you have to secure it in the same manner that you would the data center. So you're taking those type of concepts into the cloud, and that creates an opportunity for the service provider to then essentially filter and route and load balance various things, and they can be done in a virtual manner. A lot of these SASE vendors are banking on using network functions, virtualization. And how cloud and network is intertwined is like cloud is already allowing people to spin up and spin things down correctly. And if you're spinning something up, it's probably because there's been a lot of traffic being generated to something. And so that is creating an environment where the network has to keep up with the cloud too, and that has to be dynamic. And so there's a lot of aspects around SD-WAN that it's also positioning to be, well, it is more dynamic and allows you to upgrade and downgrade proportional to the cloud instances, and that's what clients are demanding now as they have more and more clouds, applications, and SASE or SaaS software in the cloud itself. And that's what I wanted to highlight here. Obviously, the more things we have, the more you need to be able to have smarter software to manage it. Next slide, Julie. And I refer to that, that at the super pop or the service pop, there is an opportunity here, and most providers who do SD-WAN SASE, they're also providing unified communications. And we learned from the pandemic that obviously those are having remote workers and having tightly integrated unified communication is key, so you don't have the jitter, the packet loss, and the voice services that are jittery and can't understand each other, or the video is choppy when you're trying to share screens and that type of thing. And so what I like to highlight is that don't overlook UCaaS as part of the overall service offering when looking at SD-WAN, because the service providers themselves have done a lot of time and energy in integrating it, and I do think you'll have a better overall experience with Office, Teams, and those if it's managed with the service provider, because they're able to then provide the right tunneling, dynamic pathing, and things of that nature to make an overall end-to-end user experience much better. But is also we have a unified communication practice here at Frost & Sullivan. I grabbed this slide too because here they're showing how things are distributed. But what I wanted to highlight here is that you see there's value-added resellers, operators, there's direct sales, technology service distributors, plus wholesalers. So, and you as customers of all of this, you're the end organization, And if you're a partner, imagine this multiple by three times each one of these, different sales contacts, sales engineers, or agents all trying to talk to a CIO. I think it highlights why it's so difficult to get in that place, because there's literally there's hundreds of service providers out there, and thousands of application providers in the enterprise IT space. And so since I came from the service provider space and the enterprise space, I always like to put a little plug in there that imagine how difficult it is for an enterprise IT organization to filter through all the various channels that are vying for their attention. So next slide, Julie. And then getting back a little bit to how SD-WAN is progressing from a partner and management perspective. This is from a Frost 2021 study, and I have a similar study launched for 2023, and we do one major end user study per kind of practice area, and ours is network, obviously, but we have some for UCaaS and security and things of that nature in other areas of the practices. But we always do some end users to augment our research with the providers themselves. And what we're seeing is 91% of the end users wanted to be managed or co-managed. And I think co-management is a neat area that SD-WAN is bringing to the table, because it's the service overlay to the network and the devices themselves, which obviously gives an opportunity for both the provider and the client to get that visibility that they need to do the best management situation. You may not need people in your home office because there's a lot of IT folks running around, but you may have branches that don't have any IT folks, and having good remote management capabilities in those spaces is obviously really key. And then the 9% doing it themselves, I came from an enterprise IT that did it themselves, and I'm not advocating for or against it. It's just a lot of times the difficulties with the do-it-yourself model is the expertise, and then the repeatable processes needed as you migrate between technologies and things of that nature. I mean, obviously, and if you have expertise, that's great, but I'm a bigger fan of managing or working with or co-managing with the service provider, much like the study says. The other interesting aspect about this research was 19% only chose their existing vendor, which means there's a lot of opportunities to partner, but it also means that it wasn't like just because you're the network service provider doesn't mean that you were the top. Certainly only 19% thought, oh, okay, I'm going to invite them to my SD-WAN RFP. And you can say that MSPs and ISPs are most used, but that's just a small percentage points between all of them, I would think. I see here that it's very clear from us that it's about on equal footing. And I'm interested to see our 2023 study to see how things changed. I think there might be a little bit of change there too. Next slide. Yes, and so here I think is the real fun part around SD-WAN, because I see this as a total win-win for both the client and the service providers. I've talked to 2 service providers within the last two to 3 years have completely rewritten their portal interfaces, because there's now just the vendors themselves too, when it comes to integrating a Versa, a Cisco, a VMware, et cetera. They've created much more robust APIs. And so this is also something I like for people to understand in the industry that's changing. It's just not a telecom environment anymore. They're becoming, technology, software driven providers. And the portal for me is that gateway to all their services, and they're using it for UCaaS to onboard or export services. They're in the software-defined networking. They're using it from order to day 2 support. there's a lot of they're using AI ops in the background, which is artificial intelligence operations, to then predict patterns and even reboot a device before it goes into a crash scenario. If we see some issues on a circuit, close that circuit off, let it work on another path while they're fixing that. And then I mentioned the WinWin, but one thing I really thought was interesting is the providers themselves are becoming much more efficient. So being software defined on the front end is making it more efficient on the back end as well, and exposing that back end to the clients. And so it's making them much more efficient, with one operator seeing about a year-over-year improvement of 57% between their tier 1 and tier 2 support levels. And then another provider I spoke with had 20% reduction in handling time. And so I do think this is a good space to be in, because it's providing the visibility I think clients always wanted, but it also is helping the operators be more efficient, and setting them up for what we call network as a service. And that allows them, because you may want to know which vendor it is, but you may not. You may just want to know, I need this bandwidth, I need it at these locations, and I have these applications at these. You tell me what's the best way to configure all of that, and I need something. And then if you've done something with network and security, these portals and integrations are also helping you to build consistent policy, across, because they can once, and just a reminder that everything physical, everything logical or automated, all sits on something physical. But so once all that's done, it lends itself, with that integration of the portals and the APIs, to be, zero touch provisioning, to apply those consistent policies across the network, and security in the multiple locations, the branch, the data center, and the cloud or multi-cloud. So yes, that's what I wanted to talk about, and I'm going to hand it over. If you go to the next slide, those are my contact details. I'm happy to be here, and I'm going to. We made it real easy today, because both of our presenters are Steve. So I'm going to hand it over to Stephen over at Sangoma to tell you a little bit more about Sangoma.
Excellent. Thank you, Steve. And hello, everybody. This is Stephen Horgan. I am the Senior Director of Product for Sangoma. And I'm going to talk a little bit about Sangoma SD-WAN and kind of how we got to this point with SD-WAN being sort of a de facto standard in today's age. So that really kind of, this first slide starts us off on this path. Sangoma has an interesting history in this space. For many years prior to offering an SD-WAN solution, we have been selling and managing MPLS private networking for our customers. And we were really good at it and successful, and had a long-standing business doing that. And there's a lot of reasons why an organization or enterprise organization would go to an organization like Sangoma to manage their network. And the fact of the matter is that these traditional private networking solutions typically have several challenges associated with them. I can really put them in a few major buckets. One could obviously be cost. A second one could be networking issues. And the third one could be operational issues. So talking first about, let's start with the networking piece of it, right? As new technologies entered the marketplace, as SaaS became more and more popular, increased in popularity, we saw a lot of these businesses and organizations that had these traditional networking structures in place having a difficult time dipping their toes into the SaaS environment and trying these new applications out that were there to promise more efficient use, that lowered their cost, and were able to disperse and scale at a much easier rate. But with traditional networking, this is difficult to do. All of your networking is heading to singular spaces, whether it be a headquarters or a data center space. And so the routing became fairly inefficient when getting out to those SaaS applications. So organizations were faced with the dilemma. What do we do to introduce these applications into our network with the current infrastructure that we have, right? And so when we talk about UCaaS and collaboration tools, latency becomes an issue, and just inefficient pathing becomes an issue. Now, from an operational standpoint, we see perhaps an even greater problem that IT managers had on their hands. And this is, obviously why we became so successful at offering these private networking solutions, because these are typically tough to manage. And if we're talking about an organization that has 10, 20, 50, 100, 500 locations, we're talking about disparate hardware. We're talking about disparate access and the vendors that are delivering that access and that hardware. And so over time, it becomes very easy and quickly becomes a challenge, a full-time challenge to manage these nodes all across your organizational network. And so not only are we having different support tracks, we have different patch cadences, we have to fly to here and there to handle issues that might be going on with our network. And oftentimes we're dealing with several different vendors, and we need to figure out what we're going to do at that particular site to manage that issue. So this is something that IT managers that have these traditional solutions are going to deal with. If we're going to be rolling out new sites, new locations, right? We typically in a traditional private layer 2 environment, we're only going to have certain options at our disposal. We're either going to have whatever underlying technology is in that area, whether it be Ethernet over copper, T1s, bonded T1s, what have you. We might have new construction that needs to happen in order to dig trenches and add new connectivity to that area. There might be technology in that area that doesn't necessarily fit that business objective that they're trying to meet, but that's all they have access to, so they go with it anyway. Maybe getting a secondary circuit to handle the data while they have that T1 handling the voice. And so, of course, as you can imagine, when we're talking about digging trenches and adding new connectivity, scaling out your business and adding new locations becomes a very slow and laborious process, right? It's not as ubiquitous as we think of when we think of broadband, widely available broadband connectivity that is blanketing the country these days that we can just tap into and have access to. It's a little bit more involved than this. So, and then of course cost, and I mentioned cost being the other one. Of course, these are expensive things to own, operate, and maintain. And when the life cycle of your equipment rolls over, you need to figure out what of course is going to be available at that time. And we might be talking about new management planes, new scripts that need to be written, whatever it might be to then roll over that technology into the next generation technology. So there were a lot of these sort of challenges going on once SD-WAN started to get introduced into the market. And so SD-WAN really became that answer, became that tool that said, you don't need to do these things anymore. You can get something that is very close or if not virtually the same as what you'd had before, while wiping away a lot of the challenges that you've been dealing with previously. Next slide. And in speaking to that, to build on top of that, what I love about the SD-WAN technology as a whole is that what we just talked about, sort of a legacy, traditional enterprise migrating onto a newer technology is really just one use case, right? But what's great about this technology is that we can be looking at drivers for a business in multiple different angles, whether you're an existing enterprise or whether you're a new startup or a new business that is trying to find the most agile and next gen networking technology that you want to have at your disposal. SD-WAN is going to be hitting a lot of different types of values in a lot of different ways. And so we always try to figure out where our customers are landing and where they're coming from to really drive that value as best we can. So we talked about network performance, we talked about operational efficiency, but one thing that I hadn't mentioned, it was on the other slide, I hadn't mentioned it yet, is that network management benefit. If you want to manage your network effectively and have a lot of visibility in a traditional private networking, you're going to spend a lot more dollars in order to have the tools and the intelligence to get that. Well, a lot of SD-WAN products these days have that baked into the value, into that system. And so you get a lot more visibility and control over how your network is functioning and working on a day-to-day basis, being able to see how that traffic is moving and making tweaks and changes to it over time to be as efficient as possible. And not to mention that with all of this, we are greatly reducing costs by leveraging low-cost broadband circuits, having an agnostic plan in place where we can just use whatever we have in that area, whatever we want to use in that area, whether it's based on cost, whether it's based on performance, and really mix and match that without really having to deal with the integration and compatibility of the systems that we have in place for a traditional networking environment. Okay. Next slide. I think we have a we're gonna break things up a little bit here. Now that I've talked about sort of traditional networking challenges and sort of the benefits of SD-WAN, we wanted to see the audience here today take a quick poll to see what kind of challenges that your businesses face today. And if you're a partner in the audience, what kind of challenges do your customers face when they're talking about their existing networking challenges? We were interested to see what you all had to say about that. So please go ahead and select one of those options. And I think once we do that, we'll have a second poll question related to the business drivers. Which SD-WAN benefits are most relevant for your business? Okay, so I listed out a few. I know that I might be speaking to your truth in a lot of these things, but I'm curious to see if any of those points that I made resonate for you or your customers, or if you have maybe a different thought there. So please go ahead and vote when you can. And I imagine once we've done that and we've gotten it all, then Julie, then we can move on, and we'll move on to the next slide. There you go. Yeah. Okay, so that was our background. Now what I would like to do is spend a few slides talking about Sangoma's SD-WAN product and how we deliver it and how we differentiate it. So Sangoma's SD-WAN product is a globally deployed SD-WAN product. Of course, we have a US map on the screen here because this is where our primary fiber ring exists in the United States, but it is a global footprint. And it's an SD-WAN network that Sangoma owns and operates ourselves. So this is our own network that we manage, that we maintain. We manage all of the patching and release cadences for. We expand as needed. So this is completely managed and operated by the Sangoma networking engineering team. So we find that to be a high value, right? When we talk about who's in charge of the network, right? We like to point out that we're not a reseller. We're not selling somebody else's network. We have complete control over the network and how it gets deployed, how it gets rolled out, and what features and functions and patching happens at which time. At the end of the day, it's not something that can be said for somebody that is simply reselling some other underlying provider's network, right? So there's all sorts of reasons why we might want to avoid a situation like that. I mean, you might see there's news in the, you might read news just recently about a prominent carrier bringing a bunch of SD-WAN customers down because some expired certificates, right? So if that were to happen to your network, a reseller is not going, you're not going to be able to point the finger at that reseller and figure out what's going on, right? And not only that, but that's something that we manage ourselves. So we would make sure that, of course, that these type of issues would not happen within our own network. So that's our job. So we are the single source of truth for your support and your escalations, and of course managing the network ourselves and not relying on anybody else to do so. Okay, so I think that's the main point that we want to bring up about our product as it differentiates itself. But as a service provider in general, Sangoma takes the white glove approach and holds the customer through the entire implementation and service and support process, and that includes dedicated implementation teams at the beginning stage of the process. Once deployed, we'll have a dedicated customer success manager that is your single source of contact for whatever it might be, support or maintenance issues. And we do, as Steve had alluded to in his slides, we do offer this in a fully managed or a co-managed model. So by default, we would of course manage it fully on behalf of the customer. But we understand that customers might be, like I said, migrating from an existing technology. They like to have their hands on the technology and have control as they're accustomed to doing. And this is absolutely the case for a lot of larger enterprises. And so, of course, we would offer that co-managed model as well. Now, being that this is a technology that is within the Sangoma network, we have the great benefit of being able to service chain a lot of our existing products into our SD-WAN environment, right? So this is when we talk about SASE being a security and network integrated play. Our cloud-based firewall can easily be service chained through the SD-WAN network to provide next-gen firewalling capability, intrusion protection, malware, antivirus, botnet protection, all of these things that go with the next-gen firewall product sent right through the SD-WAN network. And of course, with SASE, I like to think of SASE as just being a more elegant way of delivering what was traditionally two very separate environments into a single environment. We're not deploying multiple boxes on site, multiple different products that have to be configured separately. This will all go through that SD-WAN network. So again, this is delivered through our global network. Our UCaaS as well is part of these POPs, and so we are simply one hop away from not only our security solutions, but also our UCaaS solution and contact center solutions. And so by being a Sangoma SD-WAN customer, you're not just taking advantage of the SD-WAN environment, but you get easy access to additional value-added business infrastructure services that would benefit your business as well. And not to last but not least, this is a fully PCI certified network. We go through annual audits to get PCI certification, which is great for the retail space. Okay, next slide. So at a quick high level, just to describe a couple main points about what the service is and how we go to market with it. Our SD-WAN routers can support up to 1 to 4 different internet connections at one time. A lot of our big customers, especially at their headquarter locations, love to have 2 or 3 different internet connections, maybe an LTE connection as a backstop, to really make sure that you have uninterrupted uptime on the circuit side. Now, if there's a concern about the hardware side of things, going down to bullet point 3, we can also deploy these in high availability pairs. So this is a popular option, like I said, for these businesses that really are relying on 100% uptime, and you don't want to rely on a single circuit on whether or not you're going to be up or down at that particular moment. Having a high availability hardware pair with multiple circuits deployed at the same time really can more or less guarantee that 100% uptime. Now, our platform is access agnostic. Okay, so like I referenced earlier, whether you're using inexpensive DSL or cable broadband, fiber, 5G, fixed wireless, satellite technologies, we can even take old layer 2 connectivity and convert it into DIA and utilize that as well if you don't want to get rid of that quite yet. We are agnostic to whatever connectivity we have available at that point. So not only is it going to be able to drive exactly the type of connectivity that you're looking for, but in most cases compared to traditional networking, we're going to drive that cost down by a significant amount. Okay, and this is really designed as a solution to support small branch, SMB, and even SOHO locations, all the way up to data center and headquarter deployments, which we'll see on the next slide here as well. And before I get into that, I'll mention from a scoping standpoint, we like to make our product very simple to scope. It really from a location to location standpoint, the scoping really comes down to 2 pieces. There's going to be a piece of hardware that's deployed on site, and then there's going to be a software license that's going to be assigned to that hardware that really handles the type of bandwidth that we're bringing into the site. So it's going to be a straightforward monthly OpEx cost that doesn't have any metering, there's no variable cost, there's no nickel and diming of any feature costs associated with the product. So from a rollout and from an expansion standpoint, this can be a very predictable operational expense that not only is driving costs down, but it's jettisoning the old costs that we had before, but it's also creating a predictable expense as we grow. So we think that our customers really appreciate that. And from a scoping standpoint, like I mentioned, SOHO, SMB, all the way up to large data center deployments, we have licensing that can go from 10 megs to 10 gigs of throughput, which could be good for smaller data center deployments. And another thing to highlight with that is that we see a lot of times customers that are looking to move away from their MPLS infrastructure, but they may not be ready to do a full rip and replace of that infrastructure. So what we're able to do is get into this existing data center space and deploy what we would call a hybrid WAN network, right? So we have some MPLS components and we have some SD-WAN components. We don't need to fully do all one or the other, and we can introduce SD-WAN slowly into the environment until we go full SD-WAN, or maybe just keep things split depending on the requirements of those locations. So we can add a lot of flexibility into the deployment of this solution, but making sure we take advantage of a full cohesive wide area network. Okay. And on the next slide, my last slide here, I talked a little bit about the portal. Steve Thomas had talked about the importance of not only co-management, but of the portal as a window into your networking world and being able to really leverage that to the best of your ability. And from my standpoint, the portal, the GUI, the interface is where executives are really going to recognize the return on their investment, right? We've spent all this time and effort into rolling out a new SD-WAN network. How am I going to see it working for me? And that's where the portal is really going to shine, right? So for our portal specifically, we have some details and some analytics and some graphs that allow you to see the different circuits that are plugged into your location, and we can see the health and the performance of those circuits, and we can also see the enhancements that the SD-WAN product has done with the jitter buffering and the forward error correction and the latency mitigation to really take two somewhat unstable circuits and fortify them and virtually, combine them into a stable, consistent circuit for that customer. And we can judge that on various different types of metrics, right? We can look at that from a transactional point of view. We can look at it from a voice or a video point of view. And of course, those three different benchmarks, if you will, have different thresholds about what acceptable traffic might be. So you might be looking great on a transactional standpoint, but when you start looking at it from a video standpoint, it's not so much. So we want to make sure that SD-WAN is taking care of those best of its ability. So our remediation methods are really plain to see within the portal. You can drill down to any point in time on any of these graphs, see exactly what's going on with that circuit, what the issues were, what SD-WAN software recognized, and the types of mitigation efforts that SD-WAN took to fix those issues. And it's all laid out in plain English for you to be able to see, to read, and recognize. Now, in addition to that, from a graphical perspective, we can, of course, see application utilization, source and destination information. We can see from a business policy perspective what type of low, medium, high priority traffic is being utilized. And the reason why this is so critical for an IT manager to see trends over time is that they can see exactly how their network is working and if their business policies are working, matching with the type of traffic utilization that's happening within that environment, right? If you set a lot of high priority here, but we see a lot of low priority being utilized, or vice versa, we can adjust our business policies over time to better represent the traffic utilization at that site. So this is why your customer success management team and the Sangoma support team is so critical through the life of the deployment to really work with us to fine tune your network to make sure it's functioning at the best of its ability. And with that, that's all I have to talk about here. So I think we're going to move on to some questions if we have some.
Yes, we have a few. One of the questions, I should have mentioned this at the top of the presentation, is that we will be sending out a recorded version of this as well as the actual slide presentation for those who attended. So that was one of the questions. Stephen Horgan, for you, does all of my internet traffic need to go up into your core network? Can you do split tunneling, and how will that affect pricing?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. The answer is yes. Split tunneling is a very popular deployment method. And So no, it does not all need to go up to the core. We can split tunnel and send some traffic directly out to the internet. And really our pricing, when we talk about that hardware and that software, those two pieces of the scoping, the software is going to refer to the bandwidth going up to our core network. So the answer is that it would affect pricing in the sense that it would decrease pricing because we're essentially only caring about traffic going up to the core network, and we're jettisoning the other tunnel that's going direct out to the internet. So yeah, hopefully that answers the question.
Perfect. Another one for you, Stephen, is could you tell us more about your global SD-WAN footprint? Where are you located?
Sure. Yeah, we are located. So first off, we're in North America, so Canada and the United States. But outside of that, we're located in France and South Africa and Australia. We're working on a couple of POPs right now, including the UK. So that generally, I believe, I don't think I'm missing any of them. That's generally where our footprints are. And just to make a point about that, we expand our global network on sort of an opportunity-based expansion. So again, another reason why owning and operating our own network is so valuable is that when the opportunity arises, we can, of course, expand into new markets when needed. So we have US-based customers or Canadian-based customers that have global sites. We can always look at that opportunity and expand our infrastructure deployments as needed. And that's exactly how we got into the markets that we're in today.
Perfect, thank you. So Steve Thomas, I have a couple for you. As you study the market, what stage do you see SD-WAN?
Yes, I touched a teeny bit upon this earlier on. I think we're still very early stages. I think there's a lot of deployments still left out there. If you take a look at, the innovators, early adopters, those type of things, I think we're very much in the early mature stage. And, obviously with 25-30% growth rates in these areas, I do think it's something that people are using and adopting. But as Steve Horgan had also mentioned, people aren't just doing rip and replace with the MPLS. They're trying it, and then maybe they tried SD-WAN and then now they kept it running. Now they want to implement a full SASE model. And so you see that I think they're kind of keeping hybrid models out there, and that's why it hasn't been fully adopted to the mainstream network technologies and just taking over MPLS like everyone thought they would maybe 10 years ago.
Thanks. Another one for you is, can you advise more on why you think co-management is getting so popular?
Sure. Yeah, I really think with the portal technology and the way the overlay works with all these underlay technologies, and a key point that Stephen had brought up about the network management capabilities. It used to be that you had to, have something that managed your device. You used to have something that managed your network. That's pre-built into these vendors, and then on top of that, the ITSM engines from the providers themselves, like Sangoma, they're incorporating all of that intelligence in an easy to use, GUI oriented environment. And I think those combinations of things is making co-management much more interesting. That's why I'm a big fan of managed and co-managed. I just think that there's so much capabilities built into the software itself with the device manufacturers and device. It's hard to call them device. They're software companies that also have devices that they sell, but also with the integration with the network provider. Combining that together is really making a great opportunity to go forward and co-create, co-manage.
Great, thank you. So we have time for one more question from the audience, and I'll let Stephen and Steve let us know which one wants to take this question. But the question from the audience is, does SD-WAN ever make sense for a company with one location? Maybe a 10 to 20 remote at home or on the road users?
I can speak to it from a Sangoma standpoint. Certainly, you're not taking advantage of every benefit, right? Because with single locations, we are often referring to it from a wide area network perspective, businesses sharing resources and essentially being connected to one another, right? For various reasons. Now, with that said, Sangoma has quite a few single site customers within our portfolio. And you can see it from a couple different ways, a couple of the benefits that I had talked about. But really, if you're in an area that is dealing with inconsistent connectivity, there are several different ways that you can solve that issue. SD-WAN could just be one of those ways of dealing with it, right? And certainly, if you're a business that is one location that is looking to expand in the future, what better way to future-proof that expansion than to deploy an SD-WAN network within a single site environment? So I think that's how I see it. Certainly it limits some of the benefits, but some of the benefits that are still there are certainly applicable for business. And we've seen it several times within our own customer base.
Yeah, I mean, that's not, I'll just chime in as well, is that it's still relevant in that, like as Steve had mentioned about the split tunneling, and also there's so many things deployed in the cloud, it gives, even from a single site, it gives you an opportunity to hit the internet first, where many times if you have a single site and you were doing traditional networking, you have to then, your VPN into the data center, and then from the data center, you're getting out to the internet. And, depending where you are, that may not be optimal. And so there's the split tunneling and path optimization capabilities within that certainly benefits the single site environment as well.
Well, I thank both of you gentlemen, and I thank everyone who attended today for taking the time out of their busy day to spend a little time with us, and I hope that you found it informative, and we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. So everyone take care and be safe.
Take care, everybody.
Yep, thank you. Thanks, Julie. Thanks, Stephen.